everyone, welcome back to my channel, Threaded Narrative. I'm Kaylee, and today I'm going to be making the Ghost Party Quilt by woollypetals. I've seen this all over Instagram, different variations of it, so I'm really excited to try it out. I'm not actually going to make the entire quilt, but rather I'm going to choose one of the different ghost block variations and make it as a wall hanging for my background for spooky season. So I have some pretty cute fabric chosen already. I'm going to be using this layer cake that I have here, and this is by Moda Fabrics. So if you don't know what a layer cake is, it's essentially 42 individual pieces of fabric measuring 10 by 10. You can do all sorts of different things with this, so I'll be able to get a good use out of this, and I really liked the colors. So it's a really nice black, gray, and white color scheme, which I think will look really cute for the ghost pattern. So I'm going to be cutting my squares out of this for at least the background fabric. For the ghost, I'll be doing some different white variations, but I'm really excited to make this. Hopefully it'll go pretty quick, but let's get started. First things first, here I am unwrapping my Moda Fabrics Concrete Jungle layer cake that I showed earlier. Like I said, I really love all of the different colors and prints and patterns in this specific layer cake. So you can see here me filtering through all of the different fabrics in this bundle, and I'll be using a lot of these for the background of the ghost. The ghost itself is comprised of a variety of white fabrics, and I just chose some from my stash that I really loved and thought would go well with the background fabrics that I chose. Now I'm getting ready to cut out all my pieces, and I'm using my AccuQuilt for this and the 3.5-inch die, which is a 3-inch finished square. I use this die a lot. It's actually a really common size for pattern pieces, so I'm going to be using this to cut out the majority of the pieces I need for the squares for both of the background fabrics and the ghost fabrics. Once I get all of these pieces cut out and all of my other remaining pieces, I'm going to organize all of the pieces that I have by letter with my letter stickers and start moving on to finish some of these pieces. A lot of them require HSTs, so I am working on that right now. And these two pieces, E, are going to end up being the eyes. So here I am marking out my diagonal lines. I'm going to be sewing directly across these lines and then cutting along the seam. So you can see me doing that here. Once I have all those marked out, I'll be taking these to my sewing machine. Here I am doing a full HST, as you can see, and I will be doing all of the ones that are required. Here's some of these smaller ones as well. These were a little more tricky for me, but once I get those done on the sewing machine, I take those over to my iron. Like I said, cut along the seam with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Iron those seams open, and you can see that these eye pieces are really starting to come together and taking shape. After getting all of these pieces prepped, now comes the fun part, which is laying out all of the pieces according to the pattern, seeing which ones fit best where, and organizing my ghost the way I want it to be before I can actually start piecing the entire ghost together. So here's the final arrangement that I came up with. Now you're probably thinking I skipped a few steps here, and you would be right. I actually did a lot of this quilting off camera and piecing these together because I find that I can focus a lot better when I do some things off camera when I'm doing them for the first time. But you can see I use the stitch in the ditch method. Some turned out better than others. Some were really invisible, others you can see a little more plainly, but I did my best on that. And essentially, to piece these blocks together, I just took each individual square and sewed them into rows, and then I ended up sewing each of those rows together from top to bottom to make the finished ghost. I layered my pieces by using my top block and then a piece of batting, followed by my backing fabric. So I had a nice layer sandwich here. And once I had that all together, I pinned and basted it and stitched along in the ditch. You can see it turned out a bit wavy. There was a bit of shifting going around, but overall, I think it turned out really nice. And now for the finishing step, I get to move on to my binding. This is the first time I've ever actually made my own bias tape, so this was a bit of an experience for me. So here is my bias tape making kit. From this kit, I chose the red bias tape maker, and this will give you a finished width of about 3/4 of an inch. But I'm going to be cutting my fabric strips about 1 3/8 inch wide in order to achieve that finished bias tape width once I put it through the maker. Here I am laying out my fabric, making sure I'm going to be cutting along the 45-degree angle to ensure that there's some good stretch. This was a little bit tricky and trial and error for me to find out the best process of doing this, but I eventually got the hang of it and got the correct width that I needed to put through the bias tape maker. I ended up making about 5 strips total of this bias tape that I ended up putting together, but I really only ended up needing 4 in the end. So I fed my fabric strips through my bias tape maker and just ironed along those finished folded strips as I pulled the fabric through the maker. Got a little bit tangled up in there somehow. This was my first strip that I tried, but I eventually got a much better hang of it, as you can see here, and I just ended up pulling it all the way along through, giving it another once iron over, making sure everything was laying flat like I wanted it to, and now I get the fun part of attaching it. Actually, sewing on bias tape is always a little bit tricky and cumbersome for me, but I think I'm finally starting to get the hang of it after doing it a few times. So here I am attaching it to one of the sides of the back of the quilt first, and that's where I'm going to be sewing along. And I'm going to be sewing along that ditch, that first ditch in the fold of the bias tape first as I attach it to the back of the quilt. I'm just going to repeat this along all sides. Corners also tend to be really tricky for me, and I feel like I don't know if I'm doing it right until I actually do it and kind of flip the corner over to see if it worked. So this was trial and error as well, but I did get the hang of it after watching a few other tutorials, and they actually turned out really nice and sharp. Fast forward to getting the bias tape fully attached to the back of the quilt and flipping it over and attaching it to the front simply by stitching as close to the edge of the bias tape as possible. This is the last step in completing my ghost wall hanging. I hope you love it as much as I do, and please let me know what you think. thank you for watching me put together this adorable ghost wall hanging for Halloween this season. If you enjoy watching these quilt with me videos, please feel free to take a look at my other ones as well, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Well, I hope to see you somewhere else on the internet, but until then, have a great day and keep creating.